And we have with us Gene Gendel. I believe I said his name right, but please fix that if I am not saying it right. And we'll let you introduce your topic and give yourself a little bit bigger introduction, Gene.
I guess let me start sharing. And I guess the floor is mine. Is that what we're saying? I can kick off?
You sure can.
Okay. Well, okay, cool. Let me just maximize. It's kind of psychologically important for me to see as many faces as I can. So let me expand this pane. Okay. And you all see my screen, right? Do you?
Yep, we sure do.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm not so good at introducing myself. I'll just fire up my picture here and a bit of my personal bio. It's on my site if you wish. You can look it up. I have been in the industry probably long enough to, to say I jumped on a bandwagon before it became too popular. And I say it facetiously because these days Agile is the mainstream, and this terminology has been so brutally overused and misused. I think I have a bit of a privilege to say I looked into agility before agility became the mainstream. So with that, I'm going to leave it up to you to do research or look up if you wish. I have my website. Like I said, I try to make it very transparent up front. I'm very accessible, and people that wish to connect directly, they can do it by email or LinkedIn or my site itself, or the meetup that I run, large scale Scrum meetup of New York City is the biggest one in the world. It's one of a few communities that I run. Also, my free Slack channel is at your disposal. You can always ping me there if you have any questions. And I do, online coaching and training as well. So you can look it all up in my site. So, without any further ado, I'm going to jump into the subject. So today's subject is dynamic forecasting and scaling. How do these two come together? So let me parse a few statements that I prepared for you, and I'm going to literally paraphrase those statements. So traditional budgets represent a retrospective look at past situation and conditions that may not be any longer applicable in the future. Even accurate assumptions get outdated if cycle time is long. Time-consuming processes and additional financial overhead to the organization would be the result of conventional traditional budgeting. Rigid budgets often lead to fear of experimenting and researching. This is something that we really need to see Agile teams doing. So if they are rigidly constrained by non-Agile budgeting, we will least likely see them trying to experiment and innovate. Most metrics are very subjective, at least in my experience, as they make, as go up the chain of command and turn into rack statuses. When used as a yardstick to assess individual performance typically leads to an unethical behavior and system game. Now, this is probably obvious to me, but if it's not, I actually recommend reading this book by Jared Bogsness, who's a pretty well-respected person in this space, spending a lot of time with HR and finance, and speaks a lot on Agile budgeting. So Agile budgeting, dynamic budgeting, those are the things that are synonymous. Now, very quick introduction to economics of labor, and this is a simplified version of it. Now imagine, so I'm going to use very simple arithmetic here. You have hourly rate, and it's times labor hours, and it's equal to cost of labor. Now, if I was the one who was doing work, if this was my average hourly rate, depending on what kind of labor I perform, what kind of labor I do, then roughly my own estimation of labor hours would translate into the budget that my client needs to pay me. They're just simple math. Of course, there could be some permutations to it, but this is probably the very basic formula, right? That is if only one person does work, me. Now imagine if I was a part of the team. A part of the team that did work, so maybe more people, not just myself, maybe 2 or 3 to 9 people, like let's say take a Scrum team with a recommendation of 3 to 9 individuals. So this formula, although it will be still accurate, there would be some additional coefficients or attributes that need to be applied to this formula become a little complex. Now, imagine if you have multiple teams, 3 by 9 times X number that were working together, then this formula would be obviously still accurate, but not, so there would be more coefficients, more permutations, more variables in the formula. And that's just common sense, right? Because you would have to make sure that everyone normalizes their ability to estimate work. You would have to figure out how to calculate hourly rate, which is dependent on individual rates. So there would be some additional permutations to this. Now, this is really now becomes a different subject now. Instead of trying to hold the question of how do we accurately budget, we need to look to the root goal, the root goal or the upstream goal. How do we accurately estimate our work? Because let's say hourly rate is the same, or cost per unit of work is a constant. But there is a variable number of hours, so an estimate becomes a variable. So this is really the question kind of shifts now. In order to be able to do accurate budgeting, we need to do other things. We need to estimate other things. So I'm proposing to you to use a very, in my view, very powerful, very effective way to model your system. And when I say the system, I don't mean a software or hardware or a product. Organizational system or ecosystem where things happen. So I'm gonna let's work backwards from the goal. If the system goal is to do accurate budgeting, so let's see if we take this as a variable, what is required to increase the likelihood of accurate budgeting. So when we system modeling, by the way, we look at different annotations, and one of the important annotations, in which direction is your variable going? Is it going up or is it going down in volume or in strength? Here is the likelihood of accurate budgeting. We want it to go up, obviously. So upstream to that, with the likelihood of having accurate estimations. And if you disagree, please let me know why. In order to have higher accuracy and estimations, we would like to see consistency and reliability of estimation techniques by people and respective teams. At the same time, a likelihood of that having too many wrong people or teams being involved in estimation should be the opposite, should be going down. So if you have too many people or too many teams that are improperly glued together, trying to engage in estimation, the probability of these estimations not being accurate is going to be higher. Now, proper team design and duration of working together, if we take it as a variable, would also have input, respectively, to these variables. The one variable will have a direct positive input, so high is going to lead to high, and here is going to be the opposite. O stands for the opposite, by the way. So proper team design and duration of working together will increase probability that estimation techniques would be good, would be effective. And it will decrease probability, the likelihood that wrong people are involved in so-called estimations. And when I say so-called, I mean inaccurate estimations or unreliable estimations. Now, organizational ability to distinguish and see real value in real scaling, for example, of Scrum, and being able to delineate between real Scrum and copy-paste Scrum or a fixed Scrum is important here. So high is going to lead to high. Okay. And this is, of course, also going to be impacted by existence of proper product definition, proper backlog definition, and customer centricity in development. Now, just while I'm talking you through this thinking, through this logic, I'm also almost passively, indirectly, implicitly introducing this pretty important technique we use in large-scale Scrum and other system modeling exercises. These annotations mean opposite. This thick arrow means drastic impact. These thick lines mean important variable, important significance of this variable. And of course, typically what we see happening to increase accuracy of estimate, sometimes what do we do? I mean, we have so many people involved, their estimates are not accurate. We need to kind of glue this all together. So as a QF, F stands for quick fix. We throw in additional people into the pool, These are managers or leads or people that act as estimators on behalf of others. And those that have seen traditional estimation techniques at organizations, you will probably, you can recognize this. So, of course, this is a challenge. Now, this is just a pass through. I'm going to obviously share the deck with you. These are those annotations I was referring to. If you ever want to read or experiment with a system model exercise, in fact, this is called a causal loop diagram, because we look for cause and effect between different variables. This is the way to refer to. Now, so now we have to shift this conversation altogether. Instead of looking for the best ways to budget, we need to look for we need to look for answers to these questions. What are people working on? Who is estimating? Why are they estimating in the first place? What drives them to estimate? What purpose are they trying to complete? What purpose are they trying to meet? And how often are they estimating? Is it just once every half year or every month? Or do they re-estimate almost every sprint, every week, every day? I'm going to probably say the obvious, right? If we talk about this picture, obviously everyone recognizes this is just one team, basic Scrum as is defined in the Scrum guide. One product owner, one product, customer centricity product development team that is stable, live, functional, component, cross-component centric, and obviously potential one PSPI, potential shippable product increment comes out in the tail end of it. But in order for us to estimate accurately by a single Scrum team, of course, we're not even talking about dollars or yens or other currency. In order to estimate by using agnostic techniques like story point estimation or t-shirt size or BB or dog breeds, we need to have a properly structured, right? And let's just assume for the sake of argument, we were able to achieve this. We do have a team of individuals understand each other's work, and they can speak wisely and they can appreciate size and complexity of work on hand being looked upon from different perspectives. A developer, a tester, an architect, an analyst. Of course, these are skills, not roles in Scrum. So in order for this to be healthy and accurate, we need to have a real team. Now, imagine if you had a real team now, and if someone said, well, how about 5 teams or 8 teams? Well, truth be told, if you just do this, copy and paste these ad hoc created, unrelated teams, you're going to end up with what's referred as copy-paste Scrum. This is not real Scrum. This is not scaling. This is having a bunch of teams kind of stapled together, and usually there's a reason why this is happening. Oftentimes, these teams are not in true feature-centric teams. These are component teams. And the most typical reason I've seen, especially with large organizations, is because of this. Some sort of an internal gain, some sort of an internal pressure. We need to become more agile. We need to become more agile by the end of by year end, and it turns into a system gaming exercise of checking the box. Yes, we have 5 teams. We have 8 Scrum teams. We have 20 Scrum teams. Why? Well, because they all are in Jira or in some other electronic tool of record. They're managing stuff there. So that's agile. So of course, if you have this pressure, organizational pressure, or anchoring to becoming more agile, you may end up with what's copy-paste Scrum. Now, let me take you a little further on this conversation. These are 2 classic Scrum anti-patterns. The first one is pretty easy to see. When you have, it's almost like a mini waterfall within Scrum. You have SS sprint, and then design, and then a bunch of development sprints, and then something at the tail end that is testing, only one PSPI coming off the assembly line in the end. This is easy to see, and this is not so easy to see, by the way. This is multiple teams scrumming together. They have their own sprint, but I'm very skeptical about what is it that they work on that requires so much integration and bug fixing in the end that usually takes more than one sprint. And usually the reason being is because these are not real Scrum teams. These are not feature teams. These are component teams that have lots of work that is required at the tail end of it. Reasons? Well, product definition is weak. Applications and components are being treated as so-called features that are components. doing Scrum efforts are often a result of trying to meet some, as I mentioned, agile transformation goals, usually year-end goals. Territorial code ownership. You don't touch my code, they don't touch yours because there's a private code policy. Typically, they are not real. They are manufactured and they're built around sphere of control and internal control and jurisdiction. Top-down command and control and governance. Importance of Scrum dynamics is being trivialized and is being viewed as secondary to existing organizational structure blueprint. Of course, if you don't have enough, single specialty workers are more important than having T-shaped workers. That's going to be another reason. A bunch of UI UX designers running a design sprint is a classic indication of component-centric Scrum-like development, not real Scrum. Also, no meaningful HR changes that support Scrum team design because agility at large, agility at scale requires intimate involvement of HR. Instituting fake teams. What do I mean by it? Well, imagine this, and this is a bit of a digression, but it's a part of a bigger problem. If you have an existing organizational structure, if you just flip on its side 90 degrees and now call it a community, or as you may hear the word frequently used, a chapter, it's an example of a masquerade. It is very rarely translating a true community because if you preserve reporting lines and management relationships and other things like individual performance, it kind of defeats the purpose of having a community. So that is usually doesn't come along. This problem does not appear by itself. It renders with something else. For example, if you take an existing large group that consists of single specialty workers, typically managed by engagement managers, like for instance, you have a bunch of vendors that give you resources and you have to staple them together because you have command and control them. Then you artificially staple them together. Well, here's a squad. It's another nice term that I've heard plenty. Now, if you take this and shove it into what's called a tribe, right, with what's typically another way of relabeling an existing large body of work I've seen, take an existing portfolio and just relabel it and call it a tribe, and put these teams now relabeled squads and shove them into a tribe. Now the question becomes now, can this cumulative estimation by all of these several teams be more accurate? So now obviously you ask yourself this question, we really haven't changed anything about underlying dynamics. Can estimation by these very traditionally designed groups of people can be any better just because it changed terminology? In my experience, it doesn't really.
Quick question.
Sure. We can pause. I mean,
it's your audio's kind of coming in and out a little. Just so you know.
My apologies.
No, it's okay. Maybe you just push the audio button on the computer to increase the Wi-Fi link or whatever. If you have that
signal, is it still the problem? Am I still spotty?
No, that's better now.
Better. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me if I'm becoming spotty, just stop me, please. Okay. So moving on the same subject, take a bunch of teams, whether they are properly structured Scrum teams or quasi Scrum teams, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago. If you think of this from a standpoint of customer centricity, and proximity to a paying customer or an internal user who's going to be using your system, obviously you want to have a very direct line. You want to have very close proximity, so there is no translation or interim, layering that happens in between between GEMBA, where action takes place and work gets created, value gets created, and value gets consumed. You want this to be a very short conduit. Now, if you see this, obviously, without passing too much judgment on the existing commercially successful approaches, but just think conceptually. If you have too many managers and conductors and coordinators, and KPIs and RAGs and metrics and stuff that it just really surrounds and abouts your teams with multiple layers that sit on top of it, then of course the question becomes, what is this communication going to be like? How will your team be able to accurately estimate it and communicate to your customers? And how will something as important as priority and reprioritization flow back onto your teams? So it always becomes a question of customer centricity, longevity, length of your feedback loops between real customers and developers. Of course, the adaptiveness or agility or fast reaction that teams should demonstrate towards a customer becomes a question. And of course, you need to ask a question, what has really changed, right? So this is another way of indirect hinting that with this sort of setup, with such a long proximity between a customer and real teams, and I'm referring to this red convoluted snake, opportunity to estimate and communicate estimates to your clients accurately seriously hindered. Of course, you will ask, can estimation be anywhere accurate? Somewhere similarly, if you have fractal scaling, you got lots of coordination between teams, excessive coordination. These arrows, these black arrows mean too much cross-team coordination, not directly by teams, but respective conduits through Scrum Masters and through TOOs. You may not be familiar with the term just yet. You will be familiar with it in a few seconds. So when you don't have direct communication between teams, actually teams working together and estimating together, when you have too much layering in between and too much excessive coordination, like Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrums, you end up with information being lost in translation. Okay, I promise to mention to you, and of course these are just pockets of teams. You mentioned if you have many teams, and of course your estimation, your overarching estimation is going to be much less reliable, because there's something about product development, about software product development. It's called variability or variance. It grows exponentially with number of teams being involved, with number of people being involved, and with the number of communication channels that are being utilized. TO actually stands for Team Output Owner, something that we don't recommend in Scrum, one-to-one relationship, because with that comes lots of problems, such as local optimization, because there are team private backlogs. There's a coordination overhead. There's some other stuff that we don't really recommend having. So you have one team having one product owner, it's a one-to-one ratio everywhere. It becomes very fractal. With that, our ability to estimate accurately is going to be hindered. Another example, another permutation where scaling will not be in support of accuracy of estimation would be this. And some organizations, let me rephrase it, almost any organization that I know has cross-continental presence, or multiple geographies. With that could come a distribution of teams and departments of technology. Now, the challenge is, this is challenging on its own because they're not complicated, but there's a big challenge if you actually use external vendors that are very, very contractually bound to you as a client, and those contracts are not written to support agile ways of working. This is, in fact, another great opportunity to cause a little diagramming and system modeling, how these traditionally designed contracts that are, real legal external contracts and SOWs can adversely impact adaptive agile ways of working and engage with external people. Imagine this graphic, or consider this graphic. You have a client company that leverages assistance from multiple vendors. Actually, it should be vendor A, B, C, and D. Consider them as, as a typo. So each vendor is represented by an engagement lead. Why? Because that's the usual setup. There's someone on site or someone who is primary go-to person through whom all communication and coordination takes place. Now, these people manage and provide estimates on behalf of their people. It's just the usual traditional setup. The actual so-called teams, and I put them in quotes for a reason, because these are really not true teams. These are just groups of people stapled together. You can put them somewhere in the cloud, right? And they do mandate work, lots of cross-team dependencies. Now, these different colors illustrate that, and they actually imply that people representing different vendors are just being stapled together temporarily on temporary projects. So these are not real teams. And it's hard to call this a true scaling. Just because you have many teams or many groups does not really qualify to call them true scaling. With that comes lots of coordination and lots of inaccuracies in between. When you estimate and when you try to work together. So just adding A to B is not going to produce AB. Adding 5 hours plus 8 hours is not going to translate into 13 hours, just because there will be lots of upstream, downstream dependencies, and as you know, there's a lot of cascading lateness that we may see. So if one task is coming late by 3 hours, it does not mean that the downstream task is going to come in late by 3 hours as well. Most likely it will be by 5 or maybe 6 hours late. So of course, this is not the way to scale, and this is would be unfair to assume that this kind of organizational setup can produce accurate estimation. And then of course, all of the above will require lots of coordination and orchestration and delegation of responsibilities and dependence management. And that, of course, was going to lead, well, we need managers to manage dependencies, right? So we're going to end up with lots of locally optimized roles, individuals that are procured, they're asked to join just to do this specific task of estimating on behalf of others. So we will grow in the organization instead of shrinking, instead of making it leaner, simpler. Therefore, of course, this will lead to errors, omissions, and finger pointing and blame gaming, because if estimates do not turn out not to be accurate, if estimates are being shifted or being unmet, when commitments are not being met, this is a classic example of an internal contract. When a perfectly well-designed, externally written legal contract translates into an internal contract. But of course, you start looking for the locale. Who's going to be responsible for this? Usually, people that are doing work end up getting the short end of the stick, although their estimates were barely ever taken into consideration. And even though if they were asked, most likely, as those estimates went up the chain of command and translation, when they got to real customers, it was just they were not accurate. They're no longer authentic. And of course, in estimation and budgeting, we're going to have lots of these errors and omissions and all these problems. And this is going to lead to financial miscalculations. And I'm kind of taking you through this. I'm taking you to the darker zone of it. The darker zone of it would be budget cuts, because if you've miscalculated your budgets, if you have miscalculated your finances, you're going to have to pay dearly for it. Usually, it's a budget cut. And of course, unfortunately, it's a forced reduction of some sort, okay? Or something similar to forced reduction. You're gonna have to cut. You're gonna have to cut out somewhere. Something has to give. So, and therefore, all these great techniques, estimation techniques, and I'm in fact, I'm very intimately familiar with many of them, and I have used them, and I have recommended these. Coarse estimation versus fine grade estimation, day and hours versus story. So all these, I'm not going to paraphrase them. You can read them. They're great, but they become sort of trivial in the context we're having, in the context we have described, because it doesn't matter how sophisticated and intuitive your estimation techniques are, if they're not being properly applied or being used by organizational structures that are not meant to use them, and we should not be expecting much accuracy from those. It's almost like this. May not be the best analogy. You take all of these sophisticated gadgets, speedometer, altitude meter, gas meter, oil pressure gauge. If you put it on a bicycle, you're not really going to get much out of it, because they just, as sophisticated and as fancy as they are, a bicycle is not going to become more sophisticated and a more reliable vehicle from them. So as much as all of these great techniques could be used, in fact, I would recommend experimenting with these with one single properly structured cross-functional feature team, aka Scrum team, and see if they should work. If you properly structure a team, these amazing techniques, whether they're supported by tooling or not, I prefer not to use tooling for this. Yes, these are great techniques, but once you start misusing the term or team when you build together a wrong team or create a team that is really not a team, but just a bunch of people stapled together by organizational structure. These become trivial. They're fancy. They are, cute. You can even call them, good looking. But in the end, they're really not bringing too much value. It's like another analogy. It's like putting a saddle on a cow. It's not going to make it into a horse. Okay. That's my way to draw to create an analogy here. Anyway, are there any alternatives? Hopefully so. So if you go back to our good old Scrum of 3 to 9 people working together, on the same product for the same product owner out of the same product backlog. Even if not everyone can do everything. In other words, you have a cross-functional team, which is what you have, but individuals on the team are fully cross-functional. I mean, you want each person to be skilled deeply in one skill set and have broader expertise, maybe more shallow, but some breadth of knowledge. That's what we call them a T-shaped person. Even if one have this situation, or maybe with some way halfway to this nirvana state, at least if people understand each other's language, if they understand complexity and size, being described by different skills and different domain expertise people, then we're getting somewhere, right? And that's what we to start with. If we have a properly structured team, this is at least something that's required, right? But what if we have multiple teams? What if you have two, let's say 5 or 6 or 7 teams? How would that play out? Now, let me give you another analogy. Now, multiple teams doing their own Scrum versus multiple real teams sprinting together on the same part. This is the same thing. Maybe this will help understanding. You got a bunch of horses, chasing against each other, trying to get to the finish line. They have different jockeys. Maybe nice analogy with a product owner, but just for the sake of argument. Different strategy, different vision, different mission. Of course, they all want to win. This is really not true scaling. If each horse was a team, this is really not true scaling of an effort. You're not really amplifying an effort by one team in 60. This is everyone chasing on their own. Now, this is more analogous with real scaling. When you got multiple horses, one jockey, one product owner, right? Pulling in the same direction, on the same cadence, same purpose, same strategy, vision, mission, and goal. That would be more of real scaling. Take a look at this. Same sprint, same cadence, real cross-functional teams on the same heart, on the same clock, sprinting together, doing coordination, integration directly, seamlessly, without any translation layers, right? And again, hint, in large Scrum, that's what we do. We don't have any translation layers. We have Scrum masters or managers coordinating between teams, just coordinate themselves. So with that, of course, comes some additional advantage, additional beauty, right? They can refine work together, they can plan work together, and they can coordinate directly. And of course, they estimate together as well. And usually, when we teach Scrum, amongst many other things about organizational design, system dynamics, one of the big aha moments for people, well, how can you do that? 3 to 9 people on one single Scrum team. And how many teams can you allow in large-scale Scrum? Well, we recommend 2 to 8 teams. So you do the math, and the upper limit 9 times the upper limit of 8 turns out to be roughly 70-man operation just on technology side. Yeah, well, how do you do that? Well, we'll get that just in a minute, but obviously it takes longer to discuss it. But by properly structuring Scrum and large-scale Scrum events, and large-scale Scrum is Scrum, by the way. It isn't Scrum underneath of a large organizational structure buried somewhere. It's Scrum. Scaling, a large-scale Scrum that's scaled up to 8 teams. With proper organizational design, which it's a very loaded statement. What does it really mean to have a proper organizational design? But having that accomplished, we can achieve a lot of dynamicity, a lot of fluidity in estimation and coordination that is direct between teams. Another graphic illustration of how things could work together and how they do work together. Imagine there are 5 teams working side by side, 5 they're feature teams, Scrum teams. We just don't use additional terminology in large-scale Scrum. It is implied that it's a feature team. It is implied that it's a cross-functional feature team. They may not necessarily be of the same size. It could be some, 5 people, 7 people, 4 people, but same product owner, user community, users or users or people that, users or stakeholders that provide clarification, and a product owner that provides prioritization. They work very seamlessly, very closely together. There is very little. There is no work-related coordination between teams that goes through Scrum Masters. Scrum Masters in large-scale Scrum focused on something completely different. Okay, I can explain, but of course we may not have enough time. But coordination and orchestration and looking for opportunities to work together, it happens directly between teams. With this setup, of course, there's going to be a high degree of richness in collaboration between teams. I'm going to pass these. I'm going to do a pass through these couple of slides. I'm going to kind of fast forward because each slide is very loaded. In large-scale Scrum, product backlog refinement, sprint planning, sprint review and retrospective. It invites certain people, certain representatives. In certain instances, they're just representatives. But for the most part, for those key, critical, large-scale Scrum events, everyone attends. These yellow boxes speak to that. During product backlog refinement, when teams work together and refine backlog items, teams do it together. This is a great opportunity to hash out any potential opportunities to work together. Of course, estimation can take place here as well. During sprint planning, it is strongly encouraged for teams to plan work in respect to sprint backlogs together. In fact, we usually say we don't like blue boxes. If there is any reason why a team should do things on their own, we try to discourage it as we can. So consider this as an edge case. Again, it's a loaded slide. I understand we need to speak in depth and at length about less events, but we, by yellow boxes, we effectively say people work together. And of course, with this setup, there is a high probability that people can estimate together. In fact, whether we're in the same big room or we're separated by geography, we strongly recommend bringing real doers together and getting them involved in refinement and estimation. Excuse me. The main goal is really obviously, like with any estimation, not to produce a number, but to have a 3C card, conversation and confirmation. And there is really no need to be conservative or pad your estimates, or be overly aggressive and try to make them very minimal when estimating, because you're really not sure about who's going to take what work until the very last moment. So it's pretty much you invested in the overall success and overall accuracy. No one really takes ownership of any work item prior to sprint planning. So when you do backlog refinement or any any collaboration between the teams in between the events, no one really knows who's going to own what. So there was really no one is anchored. It's like, I'm going to overestimate this because this is going to be mine, and they pad it. Well, I'm going to make it more aggressive because this other team is there too far ahead of us. They're too fast, they're too effective. Let's create a little bit of a challenge for them. So there was really no need. There was really no incentive to be inaccurate artificially when you estimate. This is a very big. This is a very loaded slide. It's very loaded because it gives us 6 different ways of improving or enriching collaboration and communication in large-scale Scrum. Obviously, just talk is a very secret technique, or just scream just scream is the it's the high version of it. Scouting and traveling, a developer traveler is a very strongly recommended approach to disseminate knowledge laterally from one team on another. Again, it's a very loaded statement. How do you do it? Who does it? How and what? Just consider this. There is an opportunity, and there's a lot of support an encouragement for an individual with senior knowledge to pick up his bags or her bags and travel from one team on another team for a couple of sprints and cross-pollinate knowledge there. Please do not confuse it with shared resources. There is no such thing as large classroom. This is completely different. Open space. Please do not confuse it with the big room planning, which is a beat up term that is being used traditionally. An open space does require, as a matter of fact, a big room, lots of air, lots of light, food, but open space implies something completely different. When you have, that's why you have everyone their mother in planning or in refinement. In today's day and age, of course, we can talk about mirror boards or mural boards or some other facilitation tools and techniques that could be improvised for that. Communities. I mentioned this in a kind of semi-ironic way a couple slides back. We have a very strong emphasis. We make a very strong emphasis on communities that are meant for cross-functional learning, for functional learning. They're by volunteering only. They can die, they can live on, and they can be sunset or they can be erected as needed. These are not existing or structures put on their side just to protect the power and control of individuals. And within these communities, lots of cross-functional learning takes place. And company mentorship is so critical. Those senior people, those senior experts that have knowledge, that used to be owners and managers, are strongly encouraged to become teachers and component owners. Again, it's a very loaded statement. How do you really do it? I mean, someone's been with the firm for 20 years, and they take personal pride in being the gatekeeper of this component. No one can touch that private code. Well, depending how you handle it. If this person turns into a professor of SQL or into a professor of UI UX design, then this person will be properly, and if he, she, or she is properly positioned, then they may become they may become a very powerful amplifier of their skill and seek this knowledge to others potentially through communities. And of course, with this homogeneity in skill set and expertise, and information flow and transparency and cross-pollination with knowledge, we gradually become a system, ecosystem of people that can very eloquently and very fluently speak about complexity and size. And that's what we need when we do estimations. And when we do proper estimation, of course, budgeting for whatever work we wanted to do, we plan to do, is going to be more accurate. So these are some of the advantages. If you want to summarize them, that would be as follows. Teams that work synchronously together side by side on the same widely defined product, real product, not a fake product, not a component. For a real product owner, not a surrogate, not a proxy, not a TOO, not a product owner per team multiplied by 20. That's not the same. That will actually lead to shared understanding of work and size, complexity, and establish more reliable estimation techniques. It's just common sense. I don't think we are reinventing anything here, because if people work together, if take 3 to 9 of us, if we work long enough together and learn from each other, we're going to become much better gelled, and we will be able to estimate better together. Same product owner, shared understanding of product vision and strategy. It's going to lead to better strategic planning. That's another important element of budgeting, because based on strategic goals and strategic planning, we decide how much money we will designate for work. Obviously, short cycle time and fast feedback loops with better responsiveness to increased and decreased market demands, and potentially contraction or expansion of the product will also add to accuracy. And of course, close proximity to real customers and users will lead to more thoughtful strategic decisions about funding and budgeting. What does it all? Why it all more dynamic? Why we call it dynamic? Well, dynamic is more reactive, right? It's synonymous to reactive. It's synonymous to nimble. It's synonymous to it's synonymous to agile, adaptive. And of course, when you have real agile teams working in close proximity with one another, with very short feedback loop between themselves and the real customer, then making these decisions becomes much easier. And when you have real stakeholders and real users involved in product development, and they get the the outcome, get PSPI very frequently, their ability to gauge and change priorities and funding is going to be much more. It's going to be better. So instead of getting something back in production every 3 months or every 6 months, they will be getting something back maybe every 2 weeks or maybe every 3 weeks, and then they can do better course correction. So if they feel they need to change funding or they need to change, how much money they designate for the rest of the year, they can do on the fly. So there are multiple components. Accuracy of estimation, which is a corollary to much better, much more reliable internal dynamics, and close proximity to customer that makes these decisions much more adaptive, much more agile. So those two key things, at least, we can take from this. Of course, if we have a very large organization, very complex framework, or very quasi-unreliable team structure, quasi-scrumish, then we can apply very sophisticated techniques and tools to estimate. Even we can do earned value management. We can do some stuff that is pretty scientific, but it's, again, like putting a saddle on a cow. It's not going to run it. It's not going to make it run any faster. It's going to still not be a horse. Okay. So I'm going to pause now. I know I was trying to manage my time. I think I've covered what I needed to cover. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the fast forward. That's just an appendix. I'm going to open up the floor. Maybe there's some questions.
Yep, we have about 2 minutes left for questions. So you can either unmute and ask a question or just drop something in the chat box.
Let's see. Where's the chat here? Okay, chat. 5 minutes remaining. Oh, I haven't been reading my chat. Let me just look. Is the audio breaking up? Okay, so I'm looking for
no questions yet at this point.
Okay, please, yes, please ping there.
Actually, I've got a question. I don't know if it's a stupid question or obviously this is all about large scale Scrum. So all the teams are just doing Scrum. There's no team doing Kanban. If there is like a Kanban cadence and then they're working together as a Kanban team, so 4 or 5 Kanban teams, or is it just pure Scrum?
So I'm in this specific reference, in this specific conversation, I'm specifically referring to product-centric development when you have clearly identified product, well-defined product. Customer-centric development, you have a product, clearly identified product owner. In my experience, Scrum is just more effective way to do it, especially when you have multiple teams involved. I've worked plenty with Kanban. I see a huge value in Kanban. It's just in this case, I wouldn't be referring to it. I mean, maybe for production support of some sort, sure. But however, this is important to understand. Workflow management, queue size management, various techniques that we very well define in Kanban, the very skillful techniques, you can very well use within Scrum dynamics. Like you can manage queues, you can encourage no multitasking, single task workflow management, stuff that we have coined usually within Kanban discussions. You can very swiftly apply within Scrum, but you plan, and we use Scrum dynamics. We use Scrum events, roles, and responsibilities, and artifacts. So, but I would be careful not to use just because it's fancy. Oh, let's have the best of all worlds. Let's just put everything in big, bucket and do the jambalaya just because it's fancy and because we want to be inclusive. I would be very thoughtful about what you add to your dish and why.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. So
I don't have. I think I have. Yeah. So I still share my screen. I'm pretty easy accessible. If you have any questions about any references, anything that just strikes an aha. Maybe you want to learn, just drop me a line, LinkedIn, email, multiple channels. Do it.
Yep,
Sure.
and I did put Gene's LinkedIn in the chat, so that way you can connect to him if you're not people are usually much easier to find on LinkedIn, and then you don't have to remember where you hid their email address. So feel free to reach out to him and connect. And we just want to thank you for joining the conference today. Gene was actually our last presentation for today. So we just want to say once again, thank you for joining. I'll give you a link really quickly in the chat box. These recordings, as well as recordings from previous conferences, are going to be up. The ones from previous conferences are already out there, and then we'll be recording or putting these sessions up on that link that I just posted shortly. It may take a week or so for us to get everything up there, but in the meantime, you can watch some of the other presentations from earlier in the year. So we appreciate your participation, and we'll be doing our next conference in September.
Great. Well, thank you. Personally, I was the last one. I think hopefully I didn't bore people too much. So
you did not. They're saying there's more questions than they have time to ask.
Great job, Gene. That was awesome.
thank you, guys. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
My recording, I actually recorded myself. Cherry, is it okay?
Yeah, you should be able to just stop it and save it wherever you need it.
We'll do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Everyone stay healthy, stay well, and be safe. And thank you, Cherry, and Michael somewhere there as well, I think.
Cherry, thank you so much for organizing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.